You've got a lot to do. Wouldn't it be nice to have a little less on your mind? Eide Bailly can take the pressure off your day-to-day accounting, taxes, data issues, and other business needs. What inspires you inspires us.
This is the Art of Dental Finance and Management podcast, brought to you by Art Wiederman, CPA with Eide Bailly. Whether it's taxes and investing or planning wisely, Art is the expert to make your dental practice profitable. At Eide Bailly, what inspires you inspires us. We provide a suite of accounting and advisory services dedicated to the total care of your practice. Visit our website to access our tools and resources tailored for dentists, eidebailly.com/dentist. That's EIDEBAILLY.com/dentist. This podcast is distributed with the understanding that Art Wiederman, CPA, and Eide Bailly, LLP are not rendering legal, accounting, or other professional advice. Listeners should consult with their business advisors before acting on any of the information or opinions shared. If you have questions and or feedback, make sure to email Art over at awiederman@eidebailly.com. That's AWIEDERMAN at EIDEBAILLY.com. You can also give Art a call at 657-279-3243. Without further delay, here's your host, Dental CPA Art Wiederman.
And hello, everyone, and welcome to another edition of the Art of Dental Finance and Management with Art Wiederman, CPA. I'm your host, Art Wiederman. Welcome to the podcast. Well, we finally have some sun here in Southern California. And again, I was talking to a couple of our friends at Eide Bailly in Fargo, North Dakota, which is where our mothership office is. And I never complain about weather. And then I was talking to a friend in Minneapolis, and I certainly don't complain about weather, but it's nice to have some sun out here. And today I have a great topic for you. I have a practicing dentist, Dr. Christopher Green, who I was introduced to through both Mark Costas, who's been on our podcast before, and by Scott Haberman, who's a partner in our Fort Collins, Colorado office. And Dr. Green is not only a practicing dentist out in Parker, Colorado, which is a suburb of Denver, but he is also very involved in helping doctors with startup practices. So our subject today is going to be, if you're thinking about a startup, and by the way, doctors, not only a startup, but maybe this applies to expanding your practice or even starting a second location, we're going to talk to you today about all the good, the bad, and the ugly about what you should be thinking about. And it is amazing how many dentists are still starting up practices and are being very successful if you do it right. So we're going to get to Dr. Green in just a couple minutes. What I want to do is I want to first thank our wonderful marketing partner, Decisions in Dentistry Magazine. Lorraine Kent and her team over the last 4 years have just been amazing marketing partners with us. They have the best clinical content of any dental magazine out there, bar none. The top clinicians in the world write for them. They have 140 continuing education courses that they do on a regular basis that you can buy for a very, very reasonable price. So go to the website, www.decisionsindentistry.com. We're now coming into tax filing season, folks. Yay. So if you're having any trouble with your taxes, you can't get a hold of your CPA, things are not looking right. We at Eide Bailly are here to help you. My phone number is 657-279-3243. My email is awiederman, WIEDERMAN, at Eide Bailly, which is spelled EIDEBAILLY.com. And hopefully you all have a safe and sane tax filing season, and hopefully you don't get surprises. We get many of our new clients, and we do get a number of folks that call us every year that we help come to us because, oh my goodness, I had to pay $90,000 to my to the IRS in the state of whatever state you're in last year, and I didn't know about that, and it was a surprise, and I had to go to the bank and borrow. So we work very hard in our CPA firm in the months of October, November, and December to make sure that that does not happen. I am going to bring up a couple of things before we get to Dr. Green. First of all, for those of you who are not aware, there is in about 20 states now there is something called a workaround to the loss of the state tax deduction. So back in 2017, when the Republican-controlled Congress and President Trump got passed the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act that was signed at the end of that year, one of the things that it did was it limited the amount of state income tax that you can deduct on your itemized deduction sheet to $10,000. Now, doctors, especially those of you who live in high tax states like California and Illinois and New York, you know that you pay a lot more than $10,000 in state income taxes. Well, you can't deduct that anymore. Well, they came up with what's called a workaround for that. Now, in California, it's through something called AB 150. So let me give you an example. Let's say you have, and this is only for doctors who operate their practices under S corporations or as part of a partnership. You don't get it if you're a sole proprietor dentist, and you don't get it if you're a C corporation. So this is for S corps and partnerships, which is probably most of you. So what happens is, let's say you got $500,000 of income from your practice. You take let's say you take $100,000 as salary. That's a little light, but let's say that's what you do. And you got $400,000 left of K1 income. Well, you can make a payment here in California. It's 9.3%. So let's say you make a payment of $36,000. That's going to be your tax on that $400,000. That is a deduction on your federal K1 for your S corporation. So that's how you get the workaround. You don't get it as an itemized deduction. You get it as a deduction specifically reducing the income from your S corp. And then you get to take that amount as a credit on your tax return, on your personal tax return going forward. The rules get kind of complicated. In order to do that, at least in California, you have to make a payment by June 15th of at least $1,000. But check with your CPA. If your CPA says, I don't know about this, you might want to give us a call. But it is a way we've saved tens of thousands of dollars for doctors. And if you didn't do it for 2022, it's too late, but you can do it for 2023, especially if you're selling a dental practice. Now, today we're talking about starting, not selling, but that's one thing to consider. Also, don't forget, doctors, that if you are interested in the employee retention tax credit, if you have a greater than 50% reduction in your revenues for 2020 in the second quarter, as opposed to the second quarter of 2019, you pretty much have until probably May to get this done, because the statute of limitations on your payroll return will generally run July 31st. The credit for 2020 is $5,000 per employee for the year. And for 2021, if you have a greater than 20% reduction for any of the first 3 quarters of 2021 versus 2019, it's 20% per. It's a credit of up to $7,000 per quarter for each of your employees. It's a big deal. We've done about 125 of these over the past year and a half, and we've gotten well over $5 million in tax credits. And do be careful of any of these firms that call you up and say, by the way, because you look at TikTok, you qualify for the ERTC, because you had to social distance, because you couldn't get supplies as quickly as you could, you qualify for all the quarters. Be very, very careful about companies like that. The IRS knows their name and they're coming after them. Last thing is the HHS Provider Relief Fund. If you got money between July 1 and December 31 of 2021, you've got until March 31st to report on the HHS's website. If you got that money and it's over $10,000 and you don't report, you will have to give it back.
Be sure to check out our new Eide Bailly podcast, Ebb and Flow, a business podcast providing inspired insight on issues and trends the middle market faces. Hear unique business stories, get answers to frequently asked and unasked questions, and understand business topics that matter to you. Available now on your favorite podcast platform.
All right. Well, let's get to our topic today, startup practices. We have a lot of doctors who are starting practices up, and we're going to tell you all the good, the bad, and the ugly about that with our guest, Dr. Christopher Green. Now, as I mentioned, Dr. Green is a practicing dentist in Colorado, just outside of Denver, in the city of Parker. He's a third-generation dentist, And between his dad, his grandpa, his uncles, cousins, aunts, I don't know, friends, I don't know, he's got the Green family has collectively 175 years of experience in the dental profession in the family. In 2018, Dr. Green opened a 6-operatory practice from scratch. So he's going to kind of weave into this discussion kind of what he did and what mistakes he made and what he did good and what he did not so good. I don't know if that's proper English. I do numbers, folks. As I've told you, I don't do letters. But he opened a 6-operatory practice from scratch that's rapidly grown to a now mature and highly profitable dental practice. He also he enjoys the privilege of scaling down to 1 day a week clinically. And one of his new projects, which is why he's on this podcast, is because he's been working with Dr. Taher Dahoun. Did I pronounce that right?
Yep.
Dr. Dahoun and Dr. Mark Costas, who's very, very well known in the dental management field, to start a project called the Practice Launchpad. And we're going to talk about startup practices, and we're also going to talk about a special event that Dr. Green and Dr. Dahoun and Dr. Costas are holding on March 9th and 10th. We'll get to that a little bit later. And so anyway, Dr. Christopher Green, welcome to the Art of Dental Finance and Management.
Well, hey, Art, thanks for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
Well, thank you too. And I see on the computer screen you have a professional setup with a microphone. It looks newer than mine, but I'm sure it works just fine. And one of the things I've learned about you in researching for this recording is that you are a guitarist and that you actually did a 12-city tour with your band. Tell us about that.
Yeah, so I think this is a fun topic to start with. I like the direction we're going here so far, Art. But yeah, I started playing guitar. I think I was in 6th grade. The chops are not quite what they used to be. So some fellow guitarists might say he calls himself a guitarist. I don't think so these days, because with 2 kids, it's hard to find time to pick it up as much. But I still pick it up several times a month. But yeah, we had a little band back in the day. We went for about 5 years just playing coffee shops and YMCAs and all types of little venues. And yeah, we decided after senior year of high school, we were going to take it on the road, get away from the parents for a few weeks. And yeah, we went on a little tour. I don't know. I think I put air quotes around the word tour, but it was a blast.
So how old were you when you did this?
18.
Oh my goodness. Well, that's about the time you should be doing it. So, so you're at the Jerry Garcia level. I actually went and saw the Grateful Dead one time at the Los Angeles, at the Inglewood Forum where the Lakers used to play. And that guy can play guitar, or he used to be able to play guitar. I think he's passed. But so are your kids old enough to start playing yet?
No, we have a 3-year-old and a 6-month-old, but they enjoy listening when I pull it out. So,
well, I'm sure they will somewhere down the road. So, well, that's very cool. I mean, we have all kinds of guests that have all kinds of great hobbies and stuff like that. And I love music, as I'm sure you do too. So tell us a little bit about your professional journey. Where'd you go to dental school, and how did you get to be where you are today?
Yeah, sure. So you mentioned on the pre-call here that, 3rd-generation dentist. So my grandfather and father, both dentists, and then several other family members, uncles, cousins, all dentists. And I'm the oldest grandchild. So my grandpa and dad were like, "Hey, what are you going to do when you grow up?" And it's like, I have no clue. I'm 18 years old. I'm going to be in a rock band. Like, I'm not, obviously.
I'm going on tour with with the Rolling Stones, as a matter of fact.
Yeah. So we're going to open for the Stones, and that'll be it. But so I started to have to think seriously about how you're going to really make an income in profession. And I had always been in and out of working as an assistant or janitorial services at their practice. And,
oh my!
And
they started at the top, right?
Oh yeah. That's the beauty of working for family. You're the first to get yelled at, and you're the first to get the grunt work and all the rest. So yeah, I was definitely doing whatever was asked of me. But basically, I said, I'm gonna try to get into dental school, and went pre-med and all that fun stuff, like everybody or many of the guests or many of the folks listening did, and ended up at Temple out in Philadelphia. Graduated in 2013. And from there, went back and practiced with my dad and grandfather had passed at that time, and kind of got sick of Illinois. This was back, they practiced in Chicago. That's where we were. And so I started looking to move to Colorado and was an associate out there for several years. So, and then at some point I decided I think a startup's going to be the way to go.
Yeah, and we're going to talk about the decision that doctors have to make between startup and buying a practice and going to work for somebody and maybe partnering. So we'll get into all of that. So let's start the discussion about, what's the thinking process? A dentist comes to you and says, "Hey, I want to do a startup." So what's the thinking process to help them to decide between buying a practice, starting from scratch, going to work for somebody, being a partner, maybe going into public service or nonprofit? What's the thinking process that you help them with when you get started?
Yeah, I mean, typically, we're talking to several dentists, each of us a week. Typically, an associate that's maybe been knocked around a little bit. Maybe they're not getting treated or not getting the patient flow that they desire, and now they're wondering, how do I get into practice ownership? And we'll just hear them out, hear where they're at, and say, what are we looking at? What are your goals? What's your vision? Where do you want to live? What kind of dentistry do you want to do? And we start sorting through that. So that's kind of the initial call. And I always say, okay, you have a location in mind, great. Let's think about startup and acquisition at the same time, rather than just pigeonholing ourselves down one direction, because there could be a great acquisition opportunity in that town that you want to live, and that would be probably better for initial cash flows, wouldn't you say?
Yeah, well, that's what we talk about and I've been doing this work for almost 40 years, and you have to decide, do you want brand new equipment? Do you want to make it the way you want it? Because if you buy a practice, it's kind of, the whole thing is set up already. The systems are set up. The people are in there. You're taking over something that you didn't put a footprint on, right?
Right. I mean, I've did a startup and I've acquired a practice, and they're very different experiences for sure. It's still dentistry at the end of the day, but definitely different challenges in the early days.
Right. So who do you think is better for a start? I mean, maybe personality wise, who do you think is better for a startup? And maybe what type of a dentist, what type of a personality, or someone who has a thinking process, if you will, would be better for a purchase? What do you kind of think?
That's a tough question. I mean, and it's definitely a generalization, but in general, I would say for an acquisition, somebody that really wants to make sure that they have cash flow in the beginning. They have maybe their finances are pretty tight, and they need to have some sort of money coming in. Whereas a startup, you might have somebody that has set aside a little bit of an emergency fund, can wait for the insurance checks and the ramp up phase to get going. That's kind of the first place I'd go with that question, Art.
Okay. All right. So they decide they want to do a startup. I guess the first thing we got to figure out is, where are we going to start up? So what goes into the thought process, Dr. Green, of choosing a location for the startup practice?
Yeah, location's critical, absolutely critical. It could make or break you in the early days with a startup for sure. I know some people that have gone into saturated areas and have overcome that by just levering up big time on marketing, and that's an option. But for most young docs, they're not going to have the capital and the working capital from the bank to put that much into marketing to make that make sense. So we're looking at dentist to population ratios. We're evaluating the competition. We're evaluating the existing number of people that live in the area. If I go to an area with 25,000 people and 10 dentists versus 75,000 people, or 70,000 residents, and 15, 20 dentists, what's that ratio look like, and how many active people can I capture?
Yeah, and I think maybe a little discussion about opening up in a large metropolitan area versus opening up in a rural area. Now, I'll tell you that here in Southern California, if you drive, I always use this as an example. We have the biggest street in Huntington Beach, which is in the heart of Orange County, is Beach Boulevard. And I almost feel like when you drive down Beach Boulevard, there's almost a dental office sign on virtually every corner. So I had one doctor call me up one day, say, "I'm going to do a startup in Irvine." I said, "You're insane." And he said, no, there's a little sliver of Irvine that doesn't have a dentist. I said, what are there, like 4 people living there? So how do you look at a dentist who wants to start in a large metropolitan area versus a rural area?
Yeah. So large metropolitan area, that's, if it's what you described, that's going to be pretty tricky. And, there's area just outside Denver, Cherry Creek. It's probably the worst dentist population ratio in the area. And I know a lot of the practices in there, and they're doing okay. They're not, it's tough. It's a battle for new patients. It's just a grind up there, right? Whereas if you kind of position yourself around the large city, let's say like Denver, LA, whatever. I mean, California is its own.
Yeah.
We won't.
Well. California is now underwater. Well, by the time this comes out, it hopefully be out of underwater. But some parts we just don't hold water very well. When I used to live in New York, Dr. Green, it would rain, and then they would say, 20 minutes into the local news, it's raining. In California, it's the first 20 minutes of the local news that it's raining and what happened in the holes and all that stuff. So
it's been a crazy couple of weeks out there. But I guess what I'll say is I'll tell you my preference. My preference is if you're going to be near a big metropolitan city, look for a suburb maybe that's growing and that there's enough people there to support you where it's not super rural, but it's got potential, right? And there's not too many doctors that it's already saturated. I think the trouble with rural, at least the last couple of years, is hiring. Okay. There are no people working, let alone in a big city. I can't find anybody in a big city, let alone like some little town. And you have to know that you're going to have to be very creative if you want to eventually have associates. You have to be extremely good at taking somebody from Starbucks per se and turning them into a dental employee. You really have to know what you're doing there. And that's something that I think is often overlooked with the rural. Of course, there's opportunity, there's people, there's patients, but I think your HR headaches could be quite a bit higher, and you're going to have to be a black belt at recruiting and training.
I feel like you have to be a black belt recruiting and training now. I mean, every business is not only dentists, but struggling with finding people. I know that the ADA statistics are that 17% of hygienists have just left the profession altogether after the pandemic. We're not going to go down that road too far today. So how did you choose your location?
Yeah, so I pulled, first thing you do, pull a demographics report, kind of see the lay of the land. I said, I'm willing to be anywhere, I don't know, within an hour of Denver was kind of the thought process. And the reports came back. We were looking at a couple different towns, and then I just drove the areas. I just drove around. The numbers are very, very important, but does it also pass the eye and sniff test? And, what feels good? So when I did that, I kind of mapped everything out, started analyzing the competition, cold calling different offices to see how sophisticated these offices were that I was going to be going in next to, and landed on Parker. We had a pediatric dentist that I became friends with that was doing ground up construction and said, I'm going to have a space here for a general dentist. Are you interested?
Nice.
And it turns out this was a growing town, or is a growing town. And the intersection, he had a great plot of land at a perfect intersection that's kind of become the next main street of this area. So it worked out well. But I'm after coaching a lot of clients, finding space, it takes time, finding the right location and then finding the right space in that town or that area. It takes a lot of time. And, sometimes you strike out on 3 or 4 before you land on the one that you end up renting or buying.
And I'm one who is adamant that part of your retirement plan, doctors, is the ownership of your own suite or building. And if you can do that at the beginning, I mean, it's kind of hard when you're starting out, you're maybe 2, 3, 4 years out of dental school, or maybe 1 year out of dental school, and you want to start up and you're going to start up a practice and buy a building. That's a little... That's a lot of stuff. So, but it's something that I would encourage all of you if you can afford to do it. In the large metropolitan areas, it's a lot more challenging because of the cost of real estate.
Yep.
So that's what you did for location. So,
Art, on that topic, if I could,
yeah.
If you're in an area, outside Denver, you're not going to find a desirable building like that for less than $2 million. Probably closer to 3 or
Yeah.
4.
Yeah.
So it's like it's probably out of the picture for somebody 2 to
Right.
5 years out of school. However, you're in Alabama, you're in parts of North Carolina, Atlanta. There's banks that we work with that are creative, and it's going to be like the trade-off between your mortgage and the rent. I mean, whatever your philosophy is there, it might be worth it to get into the real estate right away
Yeah.
with very little down. But we could
Well,
go to
you have to just compare and rents here in California are a joke. So the mortgage payment, I'm sure they are the same way in Denver.
yeah, it's nuts.
It is nuts. So talk about some of the mistakes that you've worked with lots of dentists who are doing startups. I mean, you've seen others that have done startups. What are some of the biggest mistakes that some of these folks are making in doing startups?
Yeah, I think the startups have become pretty, sexy over the last few years, right? It's become very popular to do a startup. There's these Facebook groups that talk about startups all the time. And I think that, and also listening to podcasts and these success stories, I think that we downplay the amount of work that goes into it. So I think the biggest mistake is underestimating the project and what you're actually taking on, and thinking just because I could get approved by the bank to, build this thing out, that people are going to show up at your front door and you're going to have dentistry to do and you're going to make a bunch of money. It's not quite that simple. And but others have made it look simple, but we forget that there was a 10-year runway maybe done before that to get to the point where now it looks simple.
That's right. And then you get into the whole discussion of, do I sign up for every single PPO when I start the practice? We'll get to that in a little bit.
Please don't.
The answer is be really careful. So let's talk about marketing. So we found a location. We're going to start, and we'll get into the contractor here in a minute. But what kind of marketing are we going to do? What do you recommend as far as marketing a startup?
Yeah, there's a lot of ways to go. Of course, there's a lot of marketing companies out there.
Yes.
Every part of town might react differently or respond differently to different types of marketing. So some of it's beta testing certain things, but kind of just if you said the general principles would be work with a firm. Don't try to DIY marketing. Definitely build a nice website with some SEO management. Run Google AdWords, maybe some Facebook campaigns. Get your name in any of the moms of Facebook groups. We have like a Moms of Parker group, and then once the moms start talking about you, who do you go for the dentist? Once you get your name in there a few times, that's good. Same with Nextdoor. And then we ran a big postcard campaign, and we ramp up your reviews. The Google reviews, you got to get 100 as fast as humanly possible. And now you're on the map. And now people, they get the flyer, they look you up online, they check your reviews, they look at your website, and they're like, okay, this person's seems good, seems trustworthy. Go from there. We did a lot of videos as well, so you could show, you're human, you're authentic, etc. But
I love videos on a website. I mean, I like to see them right at the top of a website. And by the way, if you do a website, doctors, make sure you put your phone number right there so people can see. I can't believe how many websites I've gone on, and I'm looking around and I really want to buy this service, not necessarily a dentist, and I can't find their flipping phone number.
Yeah. The last thing I'll say about marketing, it's absolutely critical, is you got to put the work in and go around to the community. Grassroots marketing. You have a lot of time. You have a lot of holes in your schedule early on if you're doing a startup. Whether you and your 1 or 2 team members should be getting out there, talking to businesses, doing booths at different events. And, you got to be scrappy in the early days.
Yep, you do. And we have a lot to talk about, so I want to hit as many topics as I can. So now we got a location, we're thinking about marketing. Now we got to sign an office lease. What do you tell your startup clients about, what should they do? Should they go in and talk to the landlord themselves? Do they hire someone? What do you recommend on that?
Yeah, absolutely do not talk to the landlord yourself. Absolutely do not call the broker that's listed on the window of the building. You want to establish, we have some recommendations we could make if anybody needs an intro, but you want to establish a relationship with a broker that has your interests only. I mean, of course, they have their own interests. They're going to get paid, but and then the landlord's going to have their own broker. You don't want to have the same broker for each. And you initially you find a space or a broker shows you a space. you get an LOI, and don't sign that thing until your lawyer reviews it, because that everything's negotiable, right? Once the LOI is signed, a lot of the framework of the lease is in place, and it's going to be hard to backtrack on any of those big bullet points in the lease.
Yeah, and the way it works in dentistry, as I understand, Dr. Green, is that if the dentist, the person doing the startup, hires a broker, they generally don't have to pay anything for that broker, because that broker is going to go to the landlord and say, hey, landlord, you pay me a part of the rent, because it's built into their budget to pay brokers to bring them tenants. So that's a good thing for you to realize. And you want to have someone. So you want to have not only a broker who's going to negotiate the square footage and maybe TIs for you, tenant improvements, but then you've got to have an attorney who's going to look at all the legal stuff in there. I mean, there are things like recapture clauses and options that are personal or not personal. And we don't have time to get into all that today. But doctors, just if you need a referral, we can get you one. Dr. Green and I can get you one of those. So I want to take a second. I know that you guys have an event coming up on March 9th and 10th. I'll just read this. It's going to be in Houston. Am I reading this right? Houston, Texas.
Yep.
The Practice Launchpad is going to be hosting a dental startup business masterclass at the Vauxhall facility in Houston, Texas, about startups. So talk about that for a minute, and make sure you mark on your calendars, doctors, if any of you are thinking about a startup or even a second location, mark this, March 9th and 10th of 2023.
Yep. So by the time this podcast released, we'll be getting close to the event, but we should have a few seats left. So act fast if you're interested. But the event's going to go through A to Z in detail, process of a startup. How to save $20,000 or more nowadays on IT, how to save hundreds of thousands on equipment bids, how to save hundreds of thousands on construction, and everybody that comes will have access to us to ask any questions. And we have a pretty robust manual. It's a playbook for startups. I mean, let's face it, this stuff's a recipe at the end of the day, and you want the right recipe and to be connected with the right people. You don't want to be fumbling around and say, ooh, I wish I didn't hire that person for marketing, or ooh, I wish I didn't hire that person to negotiate my lease. So we're just, there to connect you and show you the ropes.
And also, Dr. Green, you consult with dentists who are thinking about doing startups. Talk a little bit about your consulting services, and then why don't you go ahead and give out your contact information in case anybody's interested. We do this on all the podcasts that we have guests on because, folks, I only have the best on here, and the best people and the best services who have number one, 100% of my doctor's interests at heart. So if, give Dr. Green a call. If you're thinking about a startup and you want to talk to him about it, I'm sure he'd be happy to talk to you. So what do you do? How does your services work? And then give out your contact information.
Absolutely. Thanks, Art. We do some private coaching for anybody doing startup or acquisition, first-time owners, pretty much, getting them from, hey, this is an idea and I'm still an associate, all the way to opening day if it's a startup, or hey, I've found this practice, or I'm looking at these prospectuses. How do I evaluate them, and how do I do this transition? And we hold their hand through the process, as many coaching calls, texts, emails as it takes, every step of the way. We have videos and books and manuals on how to do all these things, but we're also there to answer those questions right away. I have guys texting me this morning, hey, what do I do here? It takes me 5 seconds to respond with the answer, but it would have took them, 3 days to figure out what the right answer is.
I mean, there's hundreds of decisions that you have to make in building out a dental office. I mean, every little part of it. So we're going to get to that. So your contact information. How do we get a hold of you?
And the investment there, it's folding of time. So, your time's worth money, right? And we want to just get you there faster with less heartache. But to get a hold of us, my phone number, I'll just give my cell phone, 708-917-8019. Feel free to text me. To email about the event or just anything, email jbgreendental@gmail.com. And finally, to sign up for the event or just to see a little more about what we're all about, the practicelaunchpad.com is a great place to go to sign up for anything.
Sounds great. Okay. let's get back to our discussion, Dr. Green. So let's talk about the construction, because this is, we go ahead, we find a location, we sign a lease. Now we got to build it out. So what kind of trends, and let's talk about the construction process, because that's a big deal. What kind of trends are you seeing in construction space given, rising construction costs and higher interest rates?
Yeah, construction varies a lot across the country, as you know, Art. It is different in New Jersey than it is in California, than it is in Colorado or Wyoming. I have a client in Arizona, and he's having no problem with this build out, as well as the person in Denver, but we're paying a lot of money for construction these days. I have a guy in New Jersey. He just texted me last night, and he's been waiting for weeks and weeks. He can't even get a construction bid because the contractors have no subcontractors.
Right.
So it's a complete mess. And so, supply chain issues have kind of been solved. There's some things like an electrician recently didn't have everything that he needed. So there's delays on kind of can lights and the drop ceiling. But most of the supply things are figured out. But yeah, you're going to pay a lot of money on construction these days, about $100,000 more than I did in 2018.
Yeah. So one of the things I want to point out to doctors is, when you're negotiating, or you have the lease negotiator negotiating your lease, you've got to make sure that you can get a contractor to get this done. It's usually 4 to 6 months, right? Probably.
Well, we have a contractor in town that could do it in about 14 weeks. But yeah, 4 to 6 months is more realistic, Art, on a national level.
So when you sign a lease, if you sign a lease and they're going to start charging you rent in X period of time, and you can't get a contractor for a year, you're going to be paying rent on a space that is going to be sitting there. So you got to be real cognizant of that. So how do you pick a contractor? Maybe walk through what was your process?
Yeah. Usually I'll just tell my process. I started with an architect that I knew and trusted from other people, and he's been in the industry in this area for a long time. And we picked 3. I think 3 is probably the max number of contractors you want to bid out. When you do 4, they're kind of like, screw you, and they don't even want to put their time into the bid because they think it's too many. But 3, you bid it out to 3, and then you look at the bids, and then you talk to them and meet them and see who you feel the best about, because you don't always want to go with the cheapest bid, because you want to know if they're going to hit timelines, if they're going to do quality work, and what their relationships are like with their subcontractors, because it's really the subcontractors that keep the project on time.
Now, a couple of questions is, number one, it's probably a good idea if you are thinking, you bid it out to 2 or 3 contractors, and then you say, this is the one I like. Don't you really need to go look at some? Number one, we want them to probably be dental specific, right?
Typically, yeah, I would say.
If we can. Yeah, I mean, in a more rural area, that might be a little more difficult. But if they're dental specific, and we want to go out and look at the work and talk to the people that they did work for, and say, how did the process go for you?
Yeah, no, that's a huge point, and thanks for bringing that up.
Sure.
Definitely go look at offices. And talk to references, and not just, just like with anything, you go with the references they give you, but then go find your own references, right? And there's the good thing about dentistry is dentists, and it didn't used to be this way, but I feel like we're more open to sharing information. So if you have a local like Denver Dentists Club on Facebook or something, if I posted that, everybody would tell you their opinion, what contractor they like, the good, the bad, and the ugly. So that you probably have a forum like that in your community.
Yeah, or I mean, there are other forums out there too. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And then we got to go to the bank and get the money, because most of the folks don't have a bunch of money. I know that from the bankers I've spoken to in the industry, startups run anywhere between probably $500,000 and $700,000. Again, depends on the part of the country you're in. Plus, they give you some working capital for receivables and stuff like that. But when's the right time to go to the bank? When do we go to the bank after we pick the contractor? Do we go to the bank when we pick the location? When do we go to the bank?
Actually, the bank is very early. It's one of the first steps. So once I have my vision and have my an idea of what I want to create, I'm looking at demographics and I'm looking at banks, because they're going to ask for all sorts of paperwork. I don't want to have a lease signed without knowing that I have a bank in place, right? So yeah,
Right.
definitely banks.
I've seen that happen. That's scary.
Bank's one of the first things, and if anybody needs any connections to any bankers that are familiar with this, just let us know.
Yeah, both of us have those connections, and there are dental specific lenders who understand your business, who have done lots and lots of startups. Absolutely want to do that. So, so when a dentist is going to go ahead and do a startup, right? I mean, we'll talk about the numbers in a minute, but do you recommend the doctors spend their full time trying to get that thing going, or are they going to be working a day or two a week to pay some? How do you advise on that?
Yeah, it's definitely a case by case basis. In my case, I was let go from my associateship and I just went, all in on my startup. But I had a pretty nice emergency fund, having been an associate for 5-6 years. And I was ready to get going, and we started getting 120 new patients a month out the gate. So I had plenty.
Wow, 120! What did you do with 120 new patients a month?
We processed them. We made it work. We were hustling and got it done, and that's how we were able to grow so fast.
Yeah, that's amazing. But I'm assuming you also had your side gig of going all around and playing gigs with the guitar, right?
Those days were long over by then.
Well, I'm just trying to think of ways to keep you making money while you build this practice, right?
That would have been awesome. Yeah.
Yeah.
I would have been too hungover to do any dentistry.
So let's do a little math here. I'm required by law to do math in every podcast. Every one of my listeners know that. I'm a CPA. And so I've run the numbers. I've run the numbers with rent. And again, rent is a wild card because, if you're renting in, Beverly Hills, California versus renting in maybe Parker, Colorado, it might be different. I don't know. But my numbers say that to break even as a benchmark, you got to bring in about $200,000 a year. Do you have any benchmarks as far as break even, and then maybe how much working capital? Let's talk some numbers.
Yeah, that's great. So I think that overhead control starts before you open. I really do, because if you start getting in the mindset that I need to save money on every last thing, I mean, you got to spend money in some areas, then you could control your fixed costs moving forward. So my number's like 25,000 a month, done with our process. If you could produce 25,000, you're going to break even on your expenses. That includes, payroll and things like that. And that's, again, a generalization.
Okay, no, but $200,000 to $300,000 a year, because 25,000 a month is 300,000. But yeah, and you've got to be able to have enough working capital.
Yep.
So remembering that most of the banks, from what I see, are giving somewhere between $50,000, $75,000 in working capital. So doctors, if you're going to do a startup, and if Dr. Green is saying you need 300,000 because we want to be more conservative than less conservative, if you get 75,000 working capital, that means you need to generate collections of $225,000. That's about $18,000 a month, which in dentistry is not a lot. But now it kind of leads me into the next question of, okay, we're starting this practice. And I know that a lot of doctors' mindset is I have to sign up for every PPO that's out there. When you, as part of what you're going to be doing on the 9th and the 10th, I'm assuming that this is going to be part of the conversation. Talk about what you recommend to dentists who are doing startups. Do you sign up for one PPO, 3, all of them? And I know you got to be careful when you sign up for a PPO, because when you sign up for a PPO, sometimes if you read the fine print, you're signing up for 10 PPOs on the same contract. So talk a little bit about that. Yeah, no, it's an important point. And I think it depends sometimes too on the state. I would not sign up for every PPO under the sun. You're probably going to have to sign up for a few, because people are very insurance conscious, especially if we're heading into a recession at all. People are going to be watching their money a lot closer. So I don't mind some of these umbrella networks, are given that the fee schedule is high enough and close enough to your UCR that you're not discounting your services, by 50% or something. So if you could get write-offs
let's say you have the fee schedule 90% of whatever, 90th percentile, and your write-offs are, somewhere from 25 to 35 early on. I think that's reasonable. And then you go from there and you shed them down the road.
And a lot of it is going to be your marketing, and social media marketing is so important, and Facebook and Instagram and Twitter and all, and then the website, and just getting involved in the community. I mean, that's another question that I want to ask you is I always tell doctors they need to buy the practice before they buy their home. If you buy your home first and then you buy the practice, let's say you buy a home and then you find, or you're going to start a practice and you find the perfect doctor, you contract with Dr. Green and the folks at the Practice Launchpad, and they find you, they work together and they find you this great location, right? And but oh my God, this is perfect. And there's like, one dentist to every 5,000 people. Gee, wouldn't that be wonderful, right? But then you live 50 miles away. So do you talk to them about the house versus the practice and the order of doing that?
Yeah, I think that you're spot on, Art. I think it depends what your priorities are. People are so emotional about homes, though, like we know, and sometimes the spouse gets involved, and
yeah,
there's no choice there, Art. But
well, that ends it right there. I mean, the two most important. I've been married for 38 years to a wonderful. I talk about my wonderful wife Lynn all the time on this podcast, and one of my dear friends in dentistry, Dr. Phil Potter, taught me the two most important words in the English language are yes, dear. So, and it works. It really does.
It's been working for 38 years and yeah, no, that's funny. But yeah, I agree with you from a financial standpoint, get the practice first, then look at the home.
Right.
But most doctors are doing it the other way around.
Yeah. And we do see that. And I've had some doctors who live 30, 40, 50 miles away, and they commute, and that starts getting old pretty quick, and they've done okay. But I always think of my one of my long-term clients who I helped sell his practice about 10 years ago. And he lived in a very, very much a bedroom community here in Orange County. And he got his son was an Eagle Scout. He was a Boy Scout leader. He coached Little League. He coached NJB basketball. He coached AYSO soccer. He got involved in his church. He did all these things, and that's what built his practice. But it's a community thing. I mean, Dr. Green, you have I'm assuming you live pretty close to your practice location?
About 25 minutes away. So it's not in my backyard. I also didn't want to run into people at the grocery store. That's another thing. Is that what you want? That's fine if that's what you're into. For me, I just want to have a little bit of a buffer. Now, Dr. Dune, I think this is interesting if you haven't heard this before, Art, but he had a failed startup, so he pivoted to an acquisition, and he wanted to live right outside Denver, could not find a practice. So he found this practice in Greeley, which is an hour north of Denver, and he commutes every day. But it was a win for him because the practice was right. He's been able to grow it. The opportunity was more important than the commute. But I'm sure, it does get old, but that's how bad that he wanted to succeed, and he wasn't going to make a bad investment.
And it doesn't mean that if you don't live, I mean, I always talk to people, if you can live in the community you're working, that's great. But obviously, Dr. Green, you've been very successful. I mean, 120 new patients a month. I mean, I'm assuming you're not still getting 120 new patients, are you?
Well, 150 a month, but we have to be very careful. It's not, we've shed a lot of insurances, and, we hover anywhere between 120 and 150. And I don't care if we get fewer patients nowadays. That's why we acquired a practice nearby.
Yeah, that's, I mean, that because you can't sustain that. And no, it's not sustainable. Absolutely not. We were talking a little bit earlier about supply chain issues. And so in the building of this, so you're saying I've talked to some bankers in the business who do financing for startups, and they're saying that some of their startups are having to be held up 3-6 months. Are you not seeing that anymore? Is that kind of solving itself?
Well, I mean, your bankers are in the know for sure. It depends. It really does. In some cases, like I said, the supply chain issues have corrected a little bit, but there are still scenarios where there's like that one thing that they can't get. For this one client, it was lighting. For somebody else, it was flooring. And that one thing, for whatever reason, that's going to hold you up. You kind of need lights and flooring. So no, it is still an issue, Art, but I think most contractors, at least the good ones, have figured out plan B or C to get around it.
Right. Okay. All right.
I don't know. What have you heard? You've heard contrary to that, though?
Yeah, I mean, I'm hearing that again. This is California, so it's a different country, a different planet, and all that kind of stuff. But I think that we have to ask. I mean, it depends on the area. I mean, Fresno, California might be different than Sacramento, California, might be different than San Diego, California. So,
if you're doing the startup and you can't get flooring, though, I'll drive to Utah if I'm in California to go to a Floor and Decor and get the flooring. You just, you figure it out. But I think that is a good question to ask the contractors you're interviewing.
Yeah. So I now I'm going to compare this. I am starting on a journey to do a bit of a remodel of our house here in Southern California. I've never done one before. My late father-in-law, God bless him, he was a contractor. So my wife has learned a lot about this stuff. I do the tax return, So one of the things that several of my friends have told me in this is that you have to monitor the job on a daily basis. And so talk about because the dentist who's looking at the build out, they might be working a full-time job. They might be working 2 or 3 days a week. How do you recommend that the dentist who's doing the startup, how do you recommend that they get involved in monitoring the project? Do we talk to the contractor every day? Do we talk to them weekly? Do we have a list of how does that work?
Yeah, I'm really glad you brought this up, and that's good advice from your friend that said that. I prefer to be there every day if I can, or at least 5 days out of the week. Now, it's not always possible. We have a guy that's 45 minutes from his startup, so he's only getting there 2-3 days a week. And I said, you got to start figuring out a way to make this priority as we get closer to opening day. And the reason is you start to meet the subcontractors. You start to meet the general contractor has some laborers that kind of are the handymen that will help you with little things, and you'll catch things. You'll hear things from the electrician, for example. In my case, I became very good friends with, and he said, "Hey, this isn't right with your project right now. You need to look into this." So I'm getting tips on that. You're finding out if they're going to fall behind on timelines. And if the building department, if you're waiting on an inspection, I went over and pressed the building department to get over and get the inspection on time, because if it wasn't on that date, all my subcontractors' schedules were pushed out because they're booked up. So if they were supposed to come Wednesday and paint, and we missed Wednesday, you couldn't paint Wednesday because something wasn't approved. Now they're out 2 weeks because of their schedule. Does that make any sense?
No, that's good. No, that is spot on. Great advice. Absolutely. So when we're talking about come back to picking a contractor again, obviously you're going to interview face-to-face that contractor, right? I mean, you're going to recommend that you do that. So what are some questions that someone doing a startup should ask? What questions should we ask the contractor?
Yeah. How many projects like this have you done? What's your relationship like with some subcontractors? Maybe even interview some of their subcontractors. What's going on? And I like your question about supply chain. Tell me about the recent projects. What things have you been missing out on? How many projects do you have going on at once? Where am I on your priority list? Things of that nature. If you want, I have actually a list rather than bore everybody that I could send you if you want to put it in the show notes or something like that. I don't know how you guys operate, but I have.
Well, I think what might be a nice idea if you're offering this, Dr. Green, would be to my listeners is that one more time, give out your email address, and just if you want Dr. Green's list of things you should be looking at, you'd be happy to share that.
Absolutely. Email jbgreendental@gmail.com. That's Jenna Brady, my assistant. She runs the Practice Launchpad. She'll get it over to you.
Okay. So that'll be something nice for you to have and stuff. And one of the last things I want to chat with you about, which we talked about a little earlier, and maybe we'll get into some detail now. I don't want you to give away all your pearls of March 9th and 10th, but you talked about how we can save money on different things. You said IT, construction, equipment. So maybe just, and again, we're not giving out names of well, this person, if you go with them, you'll save 20,000. I mean, that's not how it works. But let's start with IT. How do you save money on IT?
I think it's about being intentional. So let's lump IT and equipment together. Being intentional about every line item on there. With an IT guy, can I go buy my own computers and then bring them to you and save the markup costs? Because you might find a computer for $500 that's the same model, but the IT guy is charging $800. So $300 here, there, $20 here or there, it all adds up.
Oh, it does. It
all adds up. So that's how I go through that with a fine-tooth comb, and we strip it apart, right?
Now, how about on the contractor side? Now, this is what I've seen, because I've been through a bunch of startups with clients over all these years. Doctors, if you want to win, I don't know if Wells Fargo is a dental lender. They used to be called Matsko. Matsko was melded into Wells Fargo. And the reason I mention them by name is that Matsko used to do a national dental design contest. And so if you want to be the dental design contest winner, and you want to have waterfalls and fish tanks and a putting, whatever you want to have there. Aren't you going to, I know that doctors all have a vision for their practice, but the fact of the matter is, and this is my opinion, and Dr. Green, I'd love to hear your comments on it. People are not going to come to you because you have the prettiest office. People are going to come to you because they hear that you are a really good dentist and that you can be trusted to help them in the best possible way with their dental care. So, you could really have a project that blows out of control if you have a vision that you want this thing to look like the next Disneyland, right?
Yeah, and I 100% agree, but you want it to look clean and nice, and less is more. I think we're moving towards that kind of minimalistic look these days, and I think that there's plenty of examples of how to make these things look nice on a fixed budget on YouTube or Pinterest or whatever. People are very creative. You borrow a few ideas there, they think it's a state-of-the-art facility, and you're laughing because you saved a bunch of money on certain aspects, but it looks good.
I'll tell you what, I have learned over the last year, you can learn anything on YouTube. YouTube has got so much. If you want to learn how to boil peas, you get like 10 videos on how to boil peas, right? It's great. So how about so you talk about equipment, and then how about saving on construction? That's a little more on that maybe?
Yeah, absolutely. So the contractors, one of the biggest things you'll have, how many items can I bring to the table? So if I look at a lighting package and I look and I say, why did the architect call for these $400 accent lights? And then I look and I had, this happened to me. So I had 20 accent lights for my plaques and diplomas. I don't care about that stuff, Art. Like they're going to be able to see them. I don't need these 400. So that's 20 times 400. We caught that. And, I'm not good at math. You're the numbers guy. We saved that much money.
That's a lot of money.
$8,000 there on lights, stupid lights. Okay. So you're going to go through and say, how do we value engineer this thing? So it might be flooring. Okay. You wanted this, this gray color LVT flooring. And from this, they called for it from this company. And you go to the contractor and say, is there a company that has the similar look for a cheaper price? And they go, yeah, why didn't you ask? I got one for half the price here. So stuff like that adds up. And then, depending on what kind of chairs and things you're going to run, there's ways to save money on plumbing and some of the more expensive things. So there's little tricks here and there, but you want to keep track of it all because you want the contractor to give you credit for those because you agree to a bid in the beginning. So I agree to a bid with you. You're my contractor. He says it's $350,000. I come to you and I save $8,000 on lighting. I want it in an email with each other, so it's documented, timestamped. That Green his bid is now less $8,000. It's $342,000.
Because if you don't do that, that contractor just made an extra $8,000 off of you that drops right to his bottom line.
Yeah, and it was your idea all along.
Exactly.
They love it. Yep.
No, they want I would that is a tough business to be in as being a building contractor. That's just a hard business.
And you want to ask them, what's your profit need to be on this? They need to make money. So,
Yeah.
okay, you said your profit needs to be 10% or 13%. Great. Then let's stick to that. And it's not, I come with these ideas to save money and now you just profited and you're up to, 15, 17%. So if they could open their books to you, see what they're actually paying the contractors, keep everybody honest, that would be great.
Fantastic. Well, we've come to about the end of our time on the podcast, Dr. Green. Great information. Before I let you give out, again, one more time about the Practice Launchpad event in Houston, any last thoughts, anything we forgot, any last tips you want to throw out to our listeners about doing a startup?
Yeah, I would say it's not all about startups. Like I said in the beginning, I like to look at acquisitions as well, Art. I think that it's you hone in on an area, you decide what's going to make the most sense for you and your family, and see where the opportunity might be. And there's a lot that goes into this, but be ready to put the work in and be ready to work harder than the guys and gals down the street, because it's work and it's missing certain things. You maybe got to skip a few vacations, skip a few bachelor parties, whatever, to get this thing done the right way.
No, that's very, very good advice, because folks, this is going to be where you're going to live for potentially 30 or 40 years. I mean, you may move offices, but hopefully. Oh, one more thing I want to jump at. When you do a startup, how many treatment rooms do we equip? How many treatment rooms do we plumb? Talk about that for a minute. I forgot that one.
Good question. I mean, ideally, I want 7 or 8 ops, but it's not always possible because you're usually looking at 2,000 to 2,500 square feet. But let's say 6 minimum. 5's really pushing it. So then you equip 3 to 4. 3's minimum. It depends what kind of producer you are. Depends what kind of patient flow you expect. I went with 4 just because I knew we were going to be rocking and rolling out of the gates. And then we added the 5th and 6th 6 months later, so we could get that on the next year's tax return.
There you
like that, Art?
That's exactly right. It's all about increasing the federal government's deficit. That's what I've done for a living for the last 38 years. Well, Dr. Christopher Green, thank you very much. I think you being connected with Dr. Mark Costas is a great thing. I mean, I have the utmost and greatest respect for Dr. Costas and what work he does. I had him on the podcast about 4 or 5 months ago. What a nice man. What a smart man. And so tell us one more time about the event in Houston, and then one more time give out your information, and then I'll ask you to just kind of stay with me until I take the podcast out.
You got it. So March 9th and 10th, 2023, down in Houston at the Voxel facility. We're limited to about 35 docs, and we'll have we're going to go A to Z startup. So it's a dental startup masterclass. Myself, Dr. Mark Costas, Dr. Tahir Doon. And if you're interested, go to thepracticelaunchpad.com or email us at jbgreendental@gmail.com. And, for the Art of Dental Finance Management listeners, we'll continue to offer the early bird special. So please mention that. And, that's just for all, that's a gift from us because of all Art does for the community and having us on today. And just, we just want to thank Art for everything over the years in the dental industry.
Well, you're very kind, Dr. Green. Just made my day. That was nice of you to say. And doctors, listen, I mean, they don't teach you in dental school how to build out a dental office. There's no class. I mean, there's occlusion, there's TMJ, there's ortho, but there's no class on building out a dental office. So if you've got an opportunity and this is what you want to do, and your dream is to build out your dream office with your footprint all over it, I mean, you've got an opportunity for 2 days to get every single thing that you need to understand it. I mean, if we're talking 16 hours, there's going to be a lot of stuff presented. So, Dr. Christopher Green, thank you very much. Say hi to Dr. Costas for me and all the folks back there. And hang on as I take this out. Folks, thank you again for the honor and privilege of your time. I'm really, really excited about all the great guests and the great information that we're going to have on here. I was talking to this morning, I was talking to our head of cybersecurity, and I in a half hour, I learned so much about the fact that cybersecurity is a big threat to all businesses. And I believe we're going to be doing a podcast on that coming up in the next couple of months. Do please and make sure that you put on your calendar, for those of you in California, And I forgot to mention this at the beginning, as I have done sometimes, but I will mention it now. We are doing a series of 4 live seminars supported by the California Dental Association and Bank of America. And we are doing one Tuesday, March 23rd at the Stone Brewery in Escondido, California from 5:30 to 8:30. I will be speaking there among other speakers, including folks from CDA, geared to younger dentists who are trying to make the decisions we talked about today that Dr. Green was talking about. Do you start up? Do you buy a practice? What do you do? Saturday, March 25th, we are tentatively scheduled at Topgolf in Ontario, California from 10 a.m. to 2 p.m. Then Saturday, June 10th, we don't have dates and times. We'll get those out to you later. We have the date, Saturday, June 10th from 9 to 12. It'll be somewhere in the Bay Area, so put that on your calendar if you're listening in Northern California. And then Thursday evening from 5:30 to 8:30, June 22nd in Sacramento. Come to those. Make sure you visit our partner, Decisions in Dentistry magazine, www.decisionsindentistry.com. Fantastic clinical content and 140 continuing education classes that you can obtain for a very, very reasonable price. That's www.decisionsindentistry.com. Our mothership is the Academy of Dental CPAs. We are a founding member at Eide Bailly. Eide Bailly works with about 1,000 dentists. The Academy works 25 CPA firms across the United States that represent over 10,000 dentists. Go to www.adcpa.org or give me a call if you're not happy with your CPA work. Give me a call. We work with lots and lots of wonderful, wonderful dentists. Give us a call, 657-279-3243, or email me at awiederman, WIEDERMAN, at eidebailly.com. With that, again, Dr. Christopher Green, thank you for your time and your expertise and what you and Dr. Costas and all your friends do for the dental profession. And with that said, I will say adieu for this edition of The Art of Dental Finance and Management with Art Wiederman, CPA. Thank you for listening. Please tell all your friends, and we'll see you next time. Bye-bye.
Thank you for listening to today's episode of the Art of Dental Finance and Management podcast. Be sure to subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts so you never miss an episode. The Art of Dental Finance and Management podcast is produced by Eide Bailly in partnership with Art Wiederman, CPA, Decisions in Dentistry magazine, and the Academy of Dental CPAs. For audience questions and feedback, email Art Wiederman, awiederman@eidebailly.com. That's AWIEDERMAN at EIDEBAILLY.com. Or you may call Art at 657-279-3243.